Well, I first of all want to thank you for giving me your precious time on a Saturday when you could have been spending that time with your families and enjoying your weekend.
You guys are fun.
So thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Gentlemen, I'm going to share with you the story of my country, Somaliland. It's a story that needs to be told. It's a story that needs to have the truth told about it. I will give you a brief so you'll have something, reference documents. But I will share with you the reality of the Horn of Africa, the Somali Horn of Africa, a horn that is very troubled, an area of the world that has known a lot of conflict and which we hope will stabilize and become an area of the world where children can grow in peace, where our youth can be educated, where we can develop our trade and our relationships stronger. We can become a commercial hub. But before that happens, we need peace. Peace is the foundation of all development. I know that you here know what Somaliland is, or where Somaliland is. As you know, Somaliland is the former British Somaliland Protectorate. To our west, there is the La Côte Française des Somalis, or the territory of the Afars and the Isas, which is now the Republic of Djibouti. Then you have British Somaliland Protectorate. And then to the east, we have La Somalia Italiana, Italian colony of Somalia, and one of the three colonies that Italy had in Africa: Somalia, Eritrea, and Libya. It's geography, it's history, it's fact. You cannot change it, I cannot change it. That is history. But very few people know about it. Somaliland is the only country among those countries that has never been colonized. We had a treaty of protection with Great Britain. Djibouti was a colony, Somalia was a colony. But Somaliland was the British Somaliland Protectorate. That is very important because as a protectorate, we have always been sovereign. Somaliland gained its independence on the 26th of June, 1960. We have the same birthday, the same Independence Day as Madagascar. And we became the 12th independent country in Africa. 42 countries sitting in the African Union today were still under colonial rule when Somaliland became independent. We have, because Somaliland had its sovereignty, we had a very powerful national movements that were campaigning for the independence of all nations. There was the wind of change, the wind of freedom in the late 50s, in the mid 50s, and the time of Kwame Nkrumah, Julius Nyerere, and Jomo Kenyatta, Hastings Banda. These are the people who were campaigning for the independence of the African countries. And the vision at that time was when these African countries would become independent, then they would form the great Pan-African movement. Our people in the 50s had that vision of unity, of cooperation, because unity is strength. Unity brings economic power. It encourages trade. Unity, wanting to unite African nations, was not something that was imposed on us, but it was something that was born out of our leaders, from our leaders, encouraged from our leaders. And our late president, Mohammed Ibrahim Egal, who was also my first husband, was one of the leaders who campaigned for the independence of African nations and Somali nations. Because we were not a colony, we had the freedom to speak and campaign. Italy was oppressing the people in Somalia. They could not hold open political campaigns. But we in Somaliland could. And for 1 year before independence, the British groomed Mohammed Ibrahim Egal, who became the first president of an independent Somali nation on the 26th of June 1960. But for 1 year, he was the leader of the government. So the British were training him to hand over the reins of governance to him. These were times when we were were passionate about our freedom, about our independence. You in Ethiopia were lucky because you were already a nation that has never been colonized. You were always free. Ethiopia is a great nation that has never known the oppression of colonialism, except for the Second World War, a few months of occupation by the Italians. But you have always been free. We also wanted to be free. When Somaliland became independent and the date was signed for the independence of Somaliland, we began to campaign for the other Somalis. And the first ones were the ones in Somalia. And the agreement was that when the two Somali nations would become independent, they would unite to form the basis, the foundation upon which future Somali nations would also join. Somaliland, therefore, is the firstborn, is the senior nation, is the first fully sovereign Somali nation. I am repeating that 20 times because that is the fact. I am repeating that because our neighbor Somalia, who is a junior partner, who became independent 1 week after Somaliland, somehow has given itself a position of owning Somaliland, given itself a position of deciding the fate of Somaliland. Where that has come from, we don't know, because Somalia has never owned Somaliland, has never won Somaliland, has never bought Somaliland. We were two independent sovereign nations who voluntarily united. Somalia, being the second independent Somali nation, somehow did not respect the Act of Union between former British Somaliland and former Italian Somalia. The Act of Union that should have formalized our union was never signed, was never approved by the parliaments of the two nations. When there was a plebiscite, a referendum, they froze it because the referendum showed that the people of Somaliland did not accept the terms that Somalia had included in the Act of Union. So in fact, Somalia and Somaliland have never united formally. It was never a formal union. There was never a signed contract. There was never a marriage. It was an informal partnership. Many people refer to Somaliland as a country that is splitting, fragmenting from Somalia. It is not. Somaliland is withdrawing from the union it tried to establish with neighboring Somalia. And the territory of Somaliland, the territory of former British Somaliland Protectorate, is as it was designed in 1883. It is the same when we gained our independence on 26 June 1960, and it is the same today. Somaliland is supportive of the African Union Constitution that condemns the fragmentation of nations. Somaliland is not a Biafra. Is not a section that is seceding or breaking away. It's not a breakaway region. It's an entity in itself, a country of Somaliland. I will give you a map. Our union is similar to the union that we had with the union that Gambia and Senegal had, exactly the same. Senegal was French, Gambia was British. Same ethnic people on both sides of the river. They united. They did not need the permission of anybody to unite. And after 6 months, it did not work. And they said, well, we were better as friends and neighbors. Let us go back to our status before the union. And they separated. They were only Senegambia for 6 months. When they separated, the world did not punish Gambia, did not punish Senegal. Their decision to unite was respected. Their decision to separate was also respected. This is exactly what happened between Somaliland and Somalia. The world accepted our union, but is not respecting our separation. Our separation came because our union failed. Our people were oppressed. Trade was moved from Somaliland to Somalia. Banking was moved. Diplomatic presence was denied in Somaliland. Our ports, our schools, our hospitals became shut down. And when the oppression intensified, they took punitive military measures. In fact, there was an attempted coup to separate. The father of Ambassador Salam was a leader of the coup that was attempted on the 10th of December 1961. 1961. I was there because I was wounded. The union failed from the beginning. And when the wish to separate became denied, it turned into a freedom fighters, militia. Many of them sought refuge inside Ethiopia to fight the oppressors, the dictatorship of Siad Barre. From 1982 until 1991, a 9-year civil war continued to separate and withdraw from that union we went into with Somalia. And that war brought airplanes to bomb our cities. Russian MiG fighters were flattening our cities. Civilians were massacred. The weak, the sick, the old, the wounded were thrown into mass graves. Young children, school children, became mobile blood banks. Mobile blood banks because they would go into the classroom and they would say, you, come over. And they would bleed them. They would just take all their blood because they believed if they're young, 11, 12-year-old, their blood is healthy, they have no disease, and they would take all the blood from their child and use for their troops. And when this child collapses, they would throw him into a mass grave. 87 mass graves have been catalogued by the United Nations forensic teams. And we keep finding new mass graves even to this day. Every time it rains, it uncovers new mass graves. Each one containing dozens, if not hundreds, of human remains, with their clothes on, with their shoes on, with their belts on. Young ones, small skeletons, baby skeletons, 5, 6, 10-year-old skeletons. What is the military danger of killing a 5-year-old because he or she is from Somaliland? That was the crime they were executed for. I am describing this in detail because the world has to know this. In 1991, 9 years after our civil war ended, we defeated the troops of Siad Barre. Ambassador, Minister Abdullahi was another freedom fighter at that time, in the bush. Once the military aggressions were ousted, we began to rebuild our country. But before we could do that, we offered a general amnesty to all our people. All the clans, traditional elders, sultans, chiefs, leaders of Somaliland agreed on 2 things. The unanimous separation from Somalia. 2, their peace among themselves. No enmity, who was with who was fighting what. General amnesty. And that general amnesty also included the troops, about 30,000 troops of Somalia were still inside Somaliland territory and were as prisoners. And for 3 months, those soldiers who were captive, who were prisoners of war, were not shot, were not killed, were not starved. They were protected for 3 months. They were given food, they were given water. A Somali gives you water, he's giving you his life. We shared whatever we had with them. And once we secured a safe corridor, we said, go home. Just go back to Somalia. That is the best thing that we ever did. We could have denied them food. We could have denied them water. Within days, they would all have been dead. The crows would have had a feast. The hyenas would have had a feast. But that would have been the wrong thing to do. We started to rebuild our country. We brought our people back from refugee camps. The biggest refugee camp in East Africa was inside Ethiopia. Harta Sheikh. Ethiopia protected our weak, our sick, our refugees, protected them from other Somalis who were bombing them. You gave 1 million of our people protection, and we will always, always be appreciative and grateful for that. Others went to Yemen, others went to Djibouti, some went to Europe and as far as they could go, running away from an enemy who was their brother, another Somali. A Somali killing a Somali. We rebuilt our country with whatever we had left. There was no Marshall Plan, there was no, what was that name? There was no plan to rebuild Somaliland. We built it ourselves. There's no IMF. There was no peace dividend. There was no international support to rebuild Somaliland. There was no World Bank. There was no IMF. There was no bilateral aid. We did it with what we had and as best as we could. We developed our constitution. We established law and order. We demobilized our powerful militia that defeated Siad Barre. Not with international troops, but we did it our way, the traditional way. We disarmed a very powerful militia with less than $100,000, paid for by the people, by the community themselves. Our neighbor Somalia has had every nation support it and has failed to demobilize its Shabab and its militia. 28 international nations have been in Somalia. Americans have been there, the Germans were there, the Brits were there, the Ethiopians are there, the Djiboutians are there, the Kenyans are there, the Ugandans are there, the Rwandans are there, the Burundians are there, the Pakistanis were there. 28 nations have given their sons and the blood of their sons to protect Somalia, inside Somalia. And a victory is still not in sight. I don't know how many Ethiopian troops have died there. I don't know how many Americans have died there. Anybody who has watched Black Hawk Down will see the Marines who were dragged in the streets. Today it is Somalia refugees who are in Kenya, Dadaab, who are protected by Kenyans in Kenya. Once peace was secured, we started our nation building, developed our constitution, elected our members of parliament, developed political parties, held a referendum in 2001, attended by international observers, to decide, to ask the people, do you approve the constitution? And do you approve the separation from Somalia? And 97% of our people said, no more Somalia. My government, the government of Somaliland, is respecting the will of the people, the will of 97% of our people who said, no Somalia. Since then, we have held 5 peaceful presidential elections. Our current president, Musa Bihi, who was elected in 97, was elected, and I will give you the figures, 305,909 votes. He had 55% of the registered votes. Formaggio next door was elected with 184 votes. Who is a true president? This is the question I ask myself. Which one is a true president? The one who was elected by 1/3 of a million people in a population of 4 million. By the way, the land of Somaliland is bigger than 18 countries in Africa. Because many people think it's a small country. We are bigger than 18 countries. Our coastline is 850 kilometers long and pirate-free 850 kilometers coastline. When right next door in Somalia, in the tip of the Horn, in that region that calls itself Puntland now, Mijertenia, is known as the world's most pirate-infested waters in the world. So right next door is the most pirate-infested waters, where ships are pirated, where people are taken hostage. And in Somaliland, we have never had one single hostage taking, Not one single act of piracy has taken place in Somaliland. And in the last 28 years that Somaliland has separated from Somalia, we've had one act of terrorism in 2008, instigated, of course, by neighboring Somalia. When Somalia experiences several terrorist acts a week, if not a day. The president of my country, Somaliland, controls the entire country of former British Somaliland Protectorate. All 175,000 square kilometers of it. The president of Farmajo does not even control one street. Even his presidency is protected by Amazon, protected for him. I wonder who is a president then? President of what? We have, Somalia has maintained peace and stability over the years. We trade with all nations. We trade with African nations. We trade with Asians. We trade with Arabs. We trade with Americans. We trade with British. We trade with all nations. Most of all, we enjoy a privileged position when it comes to our trade with Ethiopia. The port of Ethiopia has a partnership. The port of Berbera has a partnership with Ethiopia. And 19% of the port of Berbera is contracted to Ethiopia. Together we look after it. Together we manage it. Together we will build it. Together we will expand it. Together we will continue to trade with each other as we have done for millenniums and for centuries. The Berbera corridor is now being contracted and is being built. Ethiopia is in a very privileged and much appreciated position when it comes to trading with Somaliland. And at this point, I really want to thank the repeated hospitality and the welcome that our government and our delegations receive each time we come to Ethiopia. Ethiopia has become our second home. We come here for education. We come here for health. We come here for political discussions. Our partnership grows and strengthens from day to day. And I would like that to be recorded, please. Our expression of thanks and appreciation to be recorded. Recently, our president and his delegation traveled to the country of Guinea-Conakry, at the invitation of President Alpha Condé. Over the years, Somaliland heads of states, ministers, and delegations have visited over 90 countries. In each one of them, we have received warm, friendly welcome and receptions. Red carpets, presidential salutes, friendship. Our neighbors in Somalia have decided, for reasons unknown to us, to sever relations with Guinea for having welcomed the delegation from Somaliland. Now the question I ask myself is Somalia planning to sever relations with another 90 countries that have welcomed Somaliland? Is it planning to sever relations with Ethiopia, Djibouti, and others? We think this is a great disrespect to the president, who is very much loved by his people and respected by the rest of African governments, President Alpha Conde. It's a great disrespect and an insult to a head of state who cannot be given a dictation about who he can welcome to his country or not. President Alpha Conde does not need the permission of Shabab or terrorists or the heads of failed governments. And since Somalia is very expert in terrorism, I'm asking myself, are they inventing a new form of terrorism? Diplomatic terrorism? Political terrorism? This cannot work in Africa. Heads of states are sovereign and need to be respected as such. The world considers us to be still part of Somalia.